the Sicarii of Jerusalem. The year is 66 of the Common Era. You are standing shoulder to shoulder with 10,000 strangers in the most sacred city on earth, packed into the marketplace during the Feast of Pentecost. The man in front of you staggers and falls. By the time you look down, the dagger is already gone, the killer is already gone, and nobody saw a thing. The Sicarii were named for the Sica, a curved blade roughly 11 to 17 inches long, purpose-built to be drawn from under a cloak and resheathed within 2 seconds in a crowd. The historian Josephus Flavius, writing in his Jewish War around 75 of the Common Era, describes them in clinical, horrified detail. The first recorded account of organized urban assassination in Western literature. Their founder, Menahem ben Judah, traced his lineage to Judas of Galilee, placing the network's ideological roots as far back as 6 of the Common Era. When Rome finally broke them at Masada in 73, Yigael Yadin's excavations between 1963 and 1965 uncovered 29 pottery lots bearing the names of the final 960 defenders. The remnants of a last lottery to decide who would kill the others. But here is what the textbooks tend to skip. After Masada fell, Rome didn't go home. It launched 2 separate military campaigns, one in Alexandria, one in Cyrene, not to hunt fighters, but to destroy archives. Josephus documents both operations in Book 7 of Jewish War. You don't mobilize legions against paperwork unless the paperwork contains names. Names of Roman officials, names of Jewish aristocrats, names of the people who had quietly used the Sicarii to remove their own rivals. Some historians, including Martin Hengel in his 1989 study, The Zealots, suggest the Sicarii functioned in part as a private commission service available to anyone with access and payment. If that's true, Rome wasn't suppressing a rebellion at Masada. It was burning a ledger, and we have no idea what was in it. From street-level terror in Jerusalem's marketplace, we moved to a mountain no army could reach, and a network that stayed invisible for 166 years. The Hashashin Hassani Sabah didn't storm the fortress of Alamut. He walked in, one conversion at a time, turning the garrison soldier by soldier until the day he simply informed the owner that his castle had changed hands. That patience, that willingness to spend years earning a single moment, was the philosophy that would paralyze 2 continents. From that mountain stronghold in the Alborz Range, 2,100 meters above the Caspian Plain, Hassan built the most feared covert network in medieval history. The historian Farhad Daftari, in his 1994 study, The Assassin Legends, catalogs at least 35 high-certainty assassinations between 1090 and 1275 of the Common Era. Caliphs, viziers, crusader kings, Mongol generals. Conrad of Montferrat, king of Jerusalem, was killed in 1192, just 2 days after his election. Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful administrator in the Islamic world, fell in 1092. The network operated simultaneously across at least 50 fortresses, documented by researcher Peter Willey in his 2005 survey Eagle's Nest. In 1256, the Mongols under Hulagu Khan destroyed Alamut and burned its legendary library. The Persian chronicler Ata Malik Juvaini, who served the Mongol Ilkhanate and witnessed the burning personally, recorded that he selected certain texts to preserve before the flames took the rest. What he took and why is unrecorded. But here is what should stop you cold. High-value Mamluk and Mongol targets continued dying in precisely Nizari style for another 50 years after Alamut's destruction. No fortress, no organization, no one claiming responsibility. The attack on Prince Edward of England in 1272, a textbook Hashashin operation, occurred 16 years after the network was supposedly ash. Some scholars suggest the assassins were never primarily a physical infrastructure. They were a doctrine, a franchise of selective, symbolic killing that could be reactivated by any sufficiently trained cell without central command. If that's true, Hulagu Khan didn't destroy the assassins at Alamut. He destroyed their address. The next network operated not from a mountaintop, but from inside the emperor's own palace. And they were far more dangerous for it. The Roman frumentari. Their official job title translates to grain men. They counted sacks, tracked supply routes, managed military rations. That was the cover, and it was a good one, because a grain officer had legitimate reason to travel anywhere in the empire, ask any question, and linger in any city without raising alarm. Under the Emperor Hadrian, who reigned from 117 to 138 of the Common Era, these logistics clerks were quietly transformed into the Roman Empire's domestic intelligence and assassination apparatus. Inscriptions recovered from the Castra Peregrina, their operational base on the Caelian Hill in Rome, excavated beneath the current church of Santi Giovanni e Paolo, confirm their presence in Britain, Syria, and North Africa within a single generation of their creation. The German Archaeological Institute has catalogued at least 60 individual frumentarii by name and province of origin. They were not locally recruited. They were empire-wide. Aurelius Victor, writing in his De Caesaribus around 360 of the Common Era, explicitly connects the unit to political assassination under multiple emperors, including suspected involvement in the removal of senators under Septimius Severus. Their operational lifespan as an assassination-capable unit stretched approximately 150 years. Then, around 284 to 305 of the Common Era, the Emperor Diocletian dissolved them. The dissolution order, preserved in the Codex Theodosianus Book 6, uses language that appears nowhere else in Roman military law. They had become, the decree implies, a source of terror to the very population they were built to serve. But here is what makes this strange. Diocletian immediately replaced them with a functionally identical unit called the Agentes in Rebus. Same mandate, different name. The Historia Augusta records this substitution without apparent irony. You don't reform a corrupt institution by rebuilding it identically from scratch. Unless the goal isn't reform. Unless the goal is ensuring that 150 years of operational files, every commission, every name, every emperor who had used the grain men to remove a rival, disappears with the unit that held them. The complete archive of the Castra Peregrina has never been found. The Vemic courts of Westphalia. You are a nobleman of the Holy Roman Empire. You wake one morning and find a note pinned to your door with a knife. It says simply, "You have been summoned." You don't know who sent it. You don't know the charges. You don't know when the verdict will be delivered. You only know that it has already been decided. The Femgerichte, the Vemic courts, were a secret tribunal network operating across the Holy Roman Empire from roughly 1180 to 1811 of the Common Era. Their authority was semi-official and terrifying in scope. The right to try, condemn, and execute anyone within the empire's borders, including emperors, without the defendant's knowledge, without public hearing, and without appeal. Sentences were carried out by anonymous Freischaffen, initiated free judges, who left a bundle of straw and a knife beside the body as a signature. This mark appears in confirmed cases from 1350 to 1490 across at least 4 modern countries, documented in the Westphalian State Archives in Münster. At their peak in the 15th century, The courts may have had as many as 100,000 initiated members embedded across every social class in Germany, the Netherlands, and Bohemia, according to estimates from the period, with some chroniclers placing initiated membership in the tens of thousands. Emperor Frederick III himself received a formal Weymouth summons delivered to the imperial court and chose to ignore it. The summons was recorded and filed. When Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund attempted to investigate the courts in the 1420s, witnesses who agreed to testify subsequently disappeared. The investigation was dropped. Napoleon's suppression decree of 1811, issued after 630 years of operation, offers no operational explanation for dissolution. It calls them merely incompatible with modern legal order. But vestigial institutions don't require imperial suppression decrees. They fade. The specific language of the 1811 dissolution and the systematic absence of any complete Freischoven membership roll from any archive anywhere suggests the courts weren't shut down because they were obsolete. They were shut down because the record of who had commissioned 6 centuries of sentences could not be allowed to survive their dissolution. The Spartan. Crypteia. Tonight, as your graduation, the Spartan state hands you a knife, takes away your sandals, and sends you into the hills. You are 18 years old, the finest warrior in your class, and your orders are simple. Kill. Don't get caught. Come back in the spring. The people you're hunting outnumber Spartan citizens by approximately 7 to 1. That is entirely the point. The Crypteia is described by Plutarch in his Life of Lycurgus, chapter 28, and referenced with evident discomfort by Aristotle in Politics Book 2, written around 350 before the Common Era. Both were working from sources that no longer exist. Thucydides, in History of the Peloponnesian War, Book 4, provides the closest thing to a contemporary account. In 425 before the Common Era, approximately 2,000 helots, specifically selected for their valor and courage, were honored, paraded through Sparta, and then simply vanished. No announcement, no record, no explanation. Thucydides calls the method deliberate and calculated. Historian Paul Cartledge, in his 1979 study, Sparta and Laconia, places the helot to Spartan ratio at roughly 7 to 1 across Laconia and Messenia, making the Crypteia a demographic management system as much as a training exercise. And yet not a single administrative record of the program has ever been found. Not a roster, not an operational order, not a training protocol. Despite extensive archaeological work at Sparta, the Menelaon Sanctuary, and the Amycleon dating back to the early 1900s. In a culture that carved its laws into stone and displayed them publicly, the most consequential military program in Spartan history was kept entirely oral. Jean Ducas, in his study, The Helots, published in 1990, argues this was a doctrine of institutional deniability built into the program's architecture from the beginning. Sparta trained its killers in darkness and called it education. The next network trained its killers in plain sight and called it devotion. For 600 years, no one questioned them. The Thuggee. They never robbed you on the road. First, they walked with you, sometimes for days. They became your companions, your protectors, your fellow travelers. And when you trusted them completely, one of them stepped behind you, and a yellow silk strangling cloth went around your throat. The whole operation, according to William Henry Sleeman's documented accounts, took less than 4 seconds. They called the practice thuggee. Sleeman called it the oldest crime in history. He may have been understating it. Sleeman's suppression campaign between 1830 and 1848 resulted in the trial of approximately 3,689 individuals, of whom 466 were hanged, documented in British India, judicial records held in the India Office records at the British Library. The ritual implements recovered were startlingly standardized across unconnected cells spanning thousands of kilometers: the rumal strangling cloth, the pickaxe for burial, the sugar offered to the goddess Kali before each killing. A private vocabulary documented in Sleeman's 1836 Ramasayana contains 174 specialized terms, a language complex enough to require a published dictionary indicating centuries of isolated internal development. The earliest documentary reference appears in the Tariq-i-Firuz Shahi, Chronicles of Sultan Firuz Shah Tughlaq, written around 1356 of the Common Era, describing the arrest of approximately 1,000 thugs near Delhi. That places the network at least 500 years before British suppression. And yet no Mughal administrative record across 3 centuries of territorial control ever ordered a systematic campaign against them. Historian Kim Gagner, in his 2007 study, Thuggee, Banditry and the British in Early 19th Century India, calls this silence inexplicable. Some researchers ask whether the silence was policy rather than oversight, whether a network that made people disappear cleanly and quietly served interests that ran higher than criminal enterprise. If so, the British didn't discover the Thuggee. They inherited the commission book. From the dust roads of northern India, we move to a library in Cairo that took 250 years to build and weeks to burn, and ask why a victorious general chose to destroy it rather than loot it. The Fatimid Batiniya Saladin didn't just defeat the Fatimid Caliphate, he erased its memory. The year was 1171 of the Common Era, and the Dar al-Ilm, the House of Knowledge in Cairo, the greatest library in the medieval world, was gone within weeks of his conquest. Not looted, burned. Ibn Khalikan, writing around 1270 of the Common Era, placed its holdings at approximately 1.5 million volumes, the largest single collection on Earth at that moment. The question that official histories tend to skip is straightforward. Why would a conquering general, who kept every other Fatimid administrative institution intact, the tax records, the bureaucracy, the palace, choose to destroy only the library and destroy it first? The Batiniya was the Fatimid Caliphate's inner missionary network, operating a tiered initiation system in which each level of theological knowledge was used as leverage over the level below it. The outer tiers handled doctrine, the inner tiers handled politics, intelligence, and what the chronicles call the removal of obstacles. The 11th century Fatimid philosopher Hamid al-Din al-Kirmani documented the hierarchy's structure in his Rahat al-Aql, a text that functions simultaneously as philosophy and as a manual for ideological control. Hassani Sappa, who later founded the Nizari assassins, is confirmed by multiple sources to have studied within this system in Cairo between 1078 and 1081 of the Common Era. The intellectual and methodological lineage between the Batiniya and the assassins is not disputed by mainstream scholars. Saladin's own biographer, Baha ad-Din ibn Shaddad, records the library's destruction without explanation. Notable because Baha ad-Din was otherwise meticulous about documenting Saladin's reasoning, historian Paul Walker, in his 2002 study Exploring an Islamic Empire, notes that the Fatimid network maintained active cells in Sunni territories throughout its existence. Al-Makrizi records that approximately 30 individuals were permitted to remove materials from the Dar al-Ilm before the burning, under Saladin's personal supervision. The list of those 30 people and what they carried out has never been found. The eyes of the king. Darius I didn't just rule the Persian Empire, he watched it. From the ceremonial capital at Persepolis, he sent out men who carried no official title, bore no insignia of rank, and answered to no one but the king himself. They arrived in your city as guests, attended your banquets, listened to your conversations. When they left, someone usually died. Herodotus calls them the eyes and ears of the king in History's Book 1, written around 440 before the Common Era, and treats the institution as so well established it requires no introduction to his Greek audience. Xenophon, in Cyropedia Book 8, traces the network's founding to Cyrus the Great around 550 before the Common Era, with Darius later formalizing it during his reign from 522 to 486 before the Common Era. Here is the impossible part. The Persepolis fortification tablets, approximately 30,000 administrative clay documents excavated by Ernst Herzfeld beginning in 1933, now held at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago and translated by Richard Halleck in his 1969 publication, document the Achaemenid bureaucracy in extraordinary granular detail. Individual ration allocations by name, wine distributions by worker, travel expenses for specific couriers. This was one of the most administratively thorough empires in the ancient world. And the network that Herodotus describes as its primary mechanism of internal control left not a single tablet, not a single receipt, not one operational record across the entire archive. Historian Pierre Bryant, in his 2002 study From Cyrus to Alexander, calls this lacuna structurally significant. Achaemenid historian Émilie Kurt identifies at least 12 confirmed satrap removals between 522 and 465 before the Common Era, where the triggering intelligence source is entirely absent from the record. Some researchers suggest this was not bureaucratic accident but deliberate doctrine. An agent carrying no documentation could never be officially linked to the crown. Satraps removed by intelligence reports were officially removed for administrative failures. The network that identified them never officially existed. That is not improvisation. That is a system of plausible deniability operating 2,500 years before the term was invented. The Templar inner circle King Philip IV of France spent 2 years planning the morning of October 13, 1307. He needed every Knight Templar in France arrested before dawn, simultaneously across the entire country, before a single warning could travel through the network. That level of operational certainty, that confidence that not one of 15,000 knights would receive advance notice, tells you something about how thoroughly Philip understood what he was dealing with. He had been watching them long enough to know exactly how they communicated, which means he had been inside their network, or someone had. The Knights Templar maintained active establishments in approximately 870 locations across Europe and the Levant at their peak around 1260 of the Common Era, according to historian Malcolm Barber in his revised 2006 Cambridge University Press edition of The Trial of the Templars. They ran the most sophisticated financial and communications infrastructure in the medieval world, the forerunner of the modern bank draft, the sealed diplomatic courier system, intelligence networks simultaneously embedded in Muslim, Christian, and Byzantine courts. The Chinon parchment, held in the Vatican secret archives under reference Archivum Arcis Armarium D 218, is dated August 17th to 20th, 1308. It bears the authentic seal of Pope Clement V and records the private absolution of the Templar leadership, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay, approximately 18 months before his public condemnation. Barbara Frail published its existence in the Journal of Medieval History in 2004. The document had been correctly cataloged and accessible to Vatican archivists for 693 years. The Church held proof of the Templars' innocence throughout their entire imprisonment, trial, and execution. De Molay was burned alive on March 18, 1314. Barber's research identifies at least 23 Templar personnel who were never arrested in the 1307 sweep and whose subsequent fate is entirely unrecorded. In a suppression that claimed to be total, that is not an archival gap. That is an escape. Some historians, including Helen Nicholson in her 2001 study, The Knights Templar, A New History, suggest the inner network's intelligence assets were quietly absorbed into successor organizations rather than dissolved. The question isn't whether the Templars died, it's whether the network needed them to. The somatophylax of Macedon Philip II built the finest targeted killing apparatus in the ancient world. He spent 23 years using it to eliminate rival kings, neutralize inconvenient generals, and remove every obstacle between himself and the domination of Greece. Then, in July of 336 before the Common Era, at his own daughter's wedding procession in the theater at Aegi, one of his 7 personal bodyguards stepped out of the ceremonial line, drove a dagger between his ribs, and ran for a horse waiting outside the theater. The horse was saddled. It was ready. The assassin was killed before he could be questioned, and within 48 hours, every line of evidence pointing toward a conspiracy was erased by his son. Diodorus Siculus, in Library of History, Book 16, names the assassin as Pausanias and lists 3 separate parties with documented motive: Alexander, his mother Olympias, and the Persian court of Darius III. He then records that Alexander had all 3 lines of inquiry terminated within days of the killing. Plutarch, in his Life of Alexander chapter 10, notes that Pausanias's body was crucified immediately after capture, before any formal questioning, a procedure Plutarch specifically flags as unusual even by Macedonian standards, which normally permitted interrogation of regicides. The Vergina excavations by Manolis Andronikos, begun in 1977 and 1978, uncovered Tomb 2 at the ancient capital of Aegai. A forensic analysis published by Antonis Bartsiokas in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2015 confirmed skeletal remains consistent with Philip's documented injuries, including a healed lance wound to the right eye socket. The man in the tomb is almost certainly Philip. The 4 men assigned to Alexander's somatophylax in the years immediately following, Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus, went on to divide the empire after Alexander's death. The bodyguard unit was not a security detail, it was a succession council. And the man who understood that most clearly was the one who died because of it. Historian Elizabeth Carney, in her 2006 study, Olympias, mother of Alexander the Great, observes that the Philip assassination carries every structural signature of a somatophylax operation: prior intelligence, operational security, immediate witness elimination, and a beneficiary who moved with impossible speed. The most direct explanation that Philip's own apparatus was turned against him by the person who inherited it has never been refuted. It has only been left quietly unexamined. Someone saddled that horse. That person's name does not appear in any ancient source, not because it wasn't known, because every source was written under Alexander's patronage. Look at what connects these 10 networks across 4,000 years and 7 civilizations. A power builds a killing apparatus precise enough to reach anyone. It works. It works so well that it begins to accumulate something more dangerous than blades: memory. Every commission, every client, every order that was never supposed to leave the room. And at that moment, without exception, the decision is made. Dissolve it, burn the library, execute the witnesses, seal the archive before it outlives the men who filled it. Mainstream historians call this politics, and they are not entirely wrong. Power is always provisional, and the tools of one reign become the liabilities of the next. But there is a harder question underneath all of it. If these networks were simply instruments, disposable tools of statecraft, why did their creators fear them so completely at the end? Tools don't get erased. Secrets do. The fact that you're still asking that question after everything you just walked through means your instincts are calibrated correctly. This channel exists for the people who refuse to accept that the silence was accidental. Subscribe. The archive stays open. Every empire eventually faced the same problem. The men trained to protect it became the men it feared most. The knife doesn't care who's holding it. Neither did they. Subscribe, and we'll keep pulling on the threads history tried to cut.